Okay. So this is the political compass test. Now, I have many issues with this test, as I'm sure many of you do. It's not perfect. It is by no means perfect. Just to give an example of how it's not perfect, let's say you have very right-wing positions on some issues and very left-wing positions on other issues, to where it drags you all the way to the right and then all the way back to the left, and then you end up in the center, even though many of your positions could be, or you could feel that you're more of a far right winger, but you just have some very left wing perspectives. Or you could be very libertarian on some issues and very authoritarian on others. So it kind of puts you in the middle, even though you're kind of a all over the place extremist. So this is not a very strong judge of where someone is, but I think it does give you some indications. Okay, it can be useful. Let's put it that way. So okay. The first question: if economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interest of transnational corporations. Can anyone disagree with this? I mean, this is kind of a shitty question to start off on, but is there anyone that can really disagree with that? I'm pretty sure most people will agree with that, but I happen to strongly agree with that. It seems obvious. The whole point of economic structures is to serve people and humanity. So why would anyone say, fuck the people, I'm in favor of the transnational corporations? I've never met anyone who would say that. So strongly agree. I'd always support my country whether it was right or wrong. Oh, strongly disagree. That's pretty cut and dry as well, isn't it? My country, for example, started the Iraq War. Are we gonna support that? If you're in Hitler's Germany, are you gonna say, "Oh, my country did the Holocaust, but I gotta support it. It's my country"? No one chooses his or her country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. Now, I think so, but I have, it's reasonable if your country's doing a lot of great things in the world, and it's if I was born in Norway or Sweden, and I have a country where that actually takes care of its citizens a lot better than most other countries on the planet, I could see that. But ultimately, countries are pretty arbitrary. Borders are arbitrary. Beyond the historical precedent, of course, they're fairly arbitrary, and we're all humans. So on the one hand, I do kind of disagree with that statement. On the other hand, I kind of agree that if your country's awesome, I guess it makes sense. But I'm going to go ahead and slightly disagree with that, just because from a principled standpoint, I disagree with it. From a fundamental standpoint, our race has many superior qualities compared with other races. What race am I? 99% of people would say I'm white, but how do you explain that? I mean, I look white, right? But can you prove that? I mean, what is the definition of white? These are very difficult questions. But ultimately, if we just nail down, yeah, I'm white, but for any race that I would be born as, no race is inherently superior. There's a spectrum in general for every race. So yeah, I don't know why I needed to make that one so complicated. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. I strongly disagree with this because it's just not borne out in reality. That's the enemy of your enemy could be your friend, but by definition, no. I mean, that doesn't logically follow. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. Now, I'm going to say I strongly disagree with this, but here's the thing. I'm open to hear debates. If there's a hypothetical out there that you could give to me that would imply that a country for some hypothetical reason could defy international law as it currently stands, I'm willing to hear that. But all of the examples that I've seen of countries defying international law have universally been unjustified. So I'm going to go ahead and say strongly disagree. There is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. How can anyone disagree with that? I strongly agree with that. It's that's basically what I was going over, and why I started this channel was that so many people, oftentimes they confuse information with entertainment. You know what I'm saying? They act as if like you can make a point that's not really logical. It doesn't follow any deductive reasoning. And just because it's in common sense terms, it sounds reasonable and it's entertaining to the ear, then it's somehow true. But that's almost never the case. Okay. Next page. This is the economy. These are the issues that I really shine on. People are ultimately divided more by class than by nationality. I strongly agree with that. Some other countries may disagree with us on that, though. I don't know. I mean, if it said ethnicity, then I would, of course, strongly agree. But nationality, you got me thinking, because some nations are really divided. Like, there's a wealth gap in the U.S., but in terms of the wealth gap, well, no, I guess that would be a class divide anyway, wouldn't it? I'm going to go ahead and strongly agree with that. Class is probably the ultimate factor in determining where someone lies on the socioeconomic pyramid and in life in general. It has massive effect on one's life. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. Not necessarily, but I mean, okay, here's the thing. Unemployment is largely is overblown because you could reach full employment if you just enslave everybody, for example. But inflation is pretty important. However, I'm opposed to mindless consumption. So inflation's not all that important to me either, because I think a lot of people buy shit that they don't fucking need, and it's a serious danger to the planet and the world at large. And mindless consumption is one of the driving factors behind this planet being in serious risk. So I don't know. I'm not one of those people that blindly goes after making goods as cheap as they can possibly be. I think that's not necessarily necessary. That sounded silly. But for instance, I think that if you pay people a good living and you have provided all of the necessities to life, housing, water, food, etc., and all of those things are cheap, then I think it makes sense for consumer goods that are totally unnecessary to be more expensive, and for people to have to really think and decide how to spend their dollars on those things. But things like food, housing, all of that stuff, to me, of course, that should be accessible to everybody. But things like cosmetics, things like that, I don't know, they're not important to me, and I feel like people buy way too much needless shit to try to fill holes in their life that aren't really there. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if either of these things are particularly important, but I'm going to go ahead and say that unemployment is probably the more important thing. So I'll disagree. I'll slightly disagree with that. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation. 100,000,000% agree with that. Strongly, incredibly agree with that. Anyone who doesn't agree with that, I mean, I'll have the debate with you, but dude, this is kind of a moot point, isn't it? I mean, we have extreme examples of why this is totally necessary, don't we? The Hudson River, great example. You look at India, look at China, look at any of these countries where there's lack of regulation and there's incredible toxic pollutants in water. There's birth defects that are dwarfing our birth defects, for example. So I mean, that's just one. I could make an hour-long video on this, but strongly agree. Regulation totally necessary. From each according to his ability to each according to his need is a fundamentally good idea. I always struggle with this one because I believe this is the popular communist principle. But the thing about this is that I don't think the first part applies. From each according to his ability. We're quickly entering an age where humans do not need to work for many of the important baser level menial jobs to be completed. I don't think humans for very long will need to be working. We're gonna see something like universal basic income eventually. I mean, that's what I believe. Eventually, universal basic income will make it pointless for many people to work. That doesn't mean they're going to be doing nothing for society. I think people will move more towards the sciences and the arts, and I mean that's what I'd like. That's what I think everyone would like to see. But from each according to his ability, that's what I have a problem with. I think if someone doesn't want to work, it doesn't necessarily make them a bad person. And that's something that I will get into a heated disagreement with people about, because this is something right, left. You see this concept everywhere. Even people who are very socialist friendly, as I am very socialist friendly, the from each according to his ability, people get lost on that. And I think that's not necessarily the case anymore. I don't think everyone has to contribute as much as they possibly can. So I have a problem with that part. But to each according to his need, I have no problem with that part. That is the part that I 100,000,000% agree with. So This is a tough one because I mean I'm like half in agreement. This is where there should be a middle part that says I don't know or I'm in the middle of this or something. But I'm going to go ahead and slightly disagree just because I do disagree with the first part. And fundamentally, I'm sure you could find caveats in terms of thinking of hypotheticals on this. Hey, Ryan, how's it going? What's up, dude? And/or duder. So I'm going to disagree with that. It's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product. Preach it. Strongly agree. Oh, dude. It's sick, dude. Like, I don't know. It is kind of absurd. I mean, of course, there are situations where you can't get water everywhere necessarily. So, of course, we're going to have to bottle water sometimes whenever, for instance, Flint does not have the infrastructure necessary to move water around. So, yeah, sometimes it's going to need to be bottled. But the fact that that's how a lot of people get their water and they're afraid to drink the water at their homes, dude, it's fucked up. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold. Oh boy, here's where we're going to get some serious disagreements. I strongly agree with this, guys, honestly. Okay, here's my reasoning for this. Now, there are people with lots of money who buy land, buy apartments, buy buildings just as a way to make an investment to store their capital. See, they know that money is going to depreciate in value over time, but land, generally speaking, doesn't. Now, of course, there are market crashes that change this. Of course, there's a caveat to this, but, you know, whenever rich people go and buy up large amounts of land to hold their money in, it drives up the price of that because it's being used, obviously, or it's not necessarily being used, but they're buying it, so it's taken out of the general pool, and then the price of land for everybody else who wants to just, you know, live in apartments and shit, it goes up, you know, and oftentimes people get pushed out of their neighborhoods. They get pushed out of the home that they've known for, you know, in some cases generations, because it becomes too expensive, and their capital, their jobs have not kept up with the price of where they are trying to live and the price of living where they try to live. This is called gentrification, and it is a real thing. But I strongly agree that, generally speaking, land should not be a commodity to be bought and sold. I'm in favor of serious protections on land. I'm in favor of serious regulation on the distribution of land, and that's just where I stand on it, guys. It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. Absolutely 100% agree with that. The issue here is that you have people, for instance, the capital gains tax is much lower than income tax. So people who actually work a fucking job can end up paying 30%, 35% of their, or not 35%, but between 20 to 30% of their income, something like that, sometimes higher than that, right? And, you know, they're working a job, whereas someone could, you know, they could just have large amounts of money that they trade around on the stock market and then make even more money, and they just don't have to work a real job, right? And in some cases, this is all automated now. They have AI that does this for them in some cases, and increasingly that is the case. So they're not working a day in their life, and then the capital gains tax, the tax on those gains, is lower. What, 15%, I believe? So that's silly. And also, and whenever you have corporations that don't pay their taxes and make large amounts of profit, they then ship that money out. They hold it in offshore accounts or even onshore accounts, and that money does not get used. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't reflow into the economy. Now, of course, they have to make investments. Of course, they have to buy things for their company, but that's limited. A lot of the profits just get stored, and so that money is taken out of the general pool of the economy. And because wages are stagnant, whereas that money should go back into wages and increasing wages, instead, it's not going into wages and the price of goods is going up, but people's wages are not going up. It's almost as if over time, they're able to spend less money on products, and then the economy comes to a halt. So I strongly agree with that. It's highly regrettable that that happens. Protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade. I may pull some disagreements from the left on this one, because I've recently been seeing a lot of lefties just go full throttle into the, protectionism is bad 100%. And I think protectionism is sometimes necessary. Now, if this said protectionism is extremely important, then I may have said agree instead of strongly, but it says sometimes necessary. Sometimes. That's the operative word. And I do think, yes, protectionism is sometimes necessary. I've had a change of heart recently by watching some people debate on this, and I've realized, yes, the U.S. needs things from the rest of the world. That is overwhelming. The U.S. definitely needs things from the rest of the world, but we should trade out of necessity, and we should do everything we can to keep jobs good here. We should make sure to maintain labor standards here and not necessarily compete with other parts of the world where their governments aren't even trying. They're not even trying to give people a good standard of life, and we cannot compete with 50 cents an hour. I'm sorry. I don't know. So to an extent, yes, protectionism has its merits. It does absolutely have its merits. The only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver profit to its shareholders. Strongly disagree with this. And this is the entire reason why I support cooperative business. I support democratic co-ops. Now, that doesn't mean I would completely ban private business right out the gate. I think that there is a intermediary period. I think there's a transition period we're looking at. But I do think, eventually, far enough in human history, could we go entirely the cooperative model? Yeah, that's possible, sure. And I would love to see a world like that develop. But yeah, it is regrettable that most decisions in a company are made based on this profit motive for shareholders. So I super disagree with that. I think a company should exist to provide a product for the public that is necessary, that is utilitarian, but also exist to provide a decent job for the people fucking working there. Is that so crazy? The rich are too highly taxed. Oh, if we're talking about the United States, you got to be just blind to believe that at this point. Have you seen the economic inequality? The fact that, what is it? I believe it's 6 people own more wealth than the bottom half. 150, 160 million maybe at this point. So, dude, you got to come to Jesus on this one, man. The rich are not too highly taxed. We have... Yes, the rate on paper is fairly high in the developed world, but the effective rate, because of loopholes and, again, capital gains, way lower than the income tax. But the effective rate is incredibly low. It's, 11, 12%, something like that? So, yeah, they are not too highly taxed. It's the exact opposite. Those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. This kind of flips the question, doesn't it? I'm going to say I disagree with this. I think medical care should be awesome for everybody. The only case where you've got a point is that, yes, if you have more money or whatever, maybe you can buy cosmetic coverage, right? You can buy, facelifts and shit like that. Like, yeah, something like that. But is that really considered medical care though? That's not medical, that's superficial care, right? So medical care in terms of just saving lives, keeping people healthy, I think everyone should get the same awesome coverage. So I'm going to disagree with this. I feel like I want to strongly disagree with this, but I could hear arguments opposing this, honestly, but I'm going to say obviously I support universal basic coverage, so I'm gonna say I disagree with this. I want to say strongly though, dude. Okay, I'm gonna strongly disagree with this. Fuck it. Governments should penalize businesses that mislead the public. Yes. Yeah, strongly agree with that. Because, okay, take for example, Fallout 76. I know many of you play video games. You came to this channel originally, right? Fallout 76. Should they face action over that bullshit? Okay, maybe that's not the best example. No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky. Jesus, my cats are fighting. Hey, y'all cut it out. No Man's Sky. That game released totally unfinished. It lacked many of the basic features that they promised to have repeatedly over and over and over again. And then it basically just fucked people out of their money. Just totally. Now, that's a video game, okay? It could be even worse. Let's say a company does studies on a particular prescription and it somehow passes the FDA guidelines, right? And then later on, And let's say internally they knew about a problem with this prescription. They knew that it, for instance, spitballing here. Let's say that they knew it could cause a form of cancer or a birth defect, or they observed that at least once it caused this, but they omitted it from the tests. Okay, they just didn't show it in the results. They just kept it out, and they misled the public about this drug. And then thousands of people end up with this birth defect. Would you have the government take action against that? Strongly agree. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. Absolutely. If you believe in competition, and look, I'm a person who doesn't necessarily believe in competition as a rule. I think it can, to some extent, be an effective motivator, perhaps, but I much prefer cooperation. But if you believe in competition, then you absolutely have to restrict the elements at the very top because they will accumulate power. That's kind of the trend. If you haven't been paying attention to the last 100 years of capitalism, that's kind of the trend. Look at the cell phone or the cell service industry. How many cell providers do we have in the U.S. right now? AT&T, Sprint, Verizon, those are the big three. And then you got T-Mobile. Actually, I think T-Mobile is up there too. It may be above Sprint at this point. So you got those four. And then arguably Boost and Cricket. I'm pretty sure though at this point that Cricket is a subsidiary, isn't it? And Boost may also be owned by someone else. I don't know for sure. But you got 6 companies controlling the entire country's cell bandwidth. So that's pretty silly. And it stifles competition, to be sure. The free market, the freer the people. Or the freer the market, the freer the people. This is a weird word. Can we all agree that this is a weird word? So I'm going to strongly disagree with that, dude. Cannot disagree more with that, in fact, because, for example, let's say the government says, okay, we're not going to provide any healthcare coverage. Let's just let the free market decide. Companies can compete in providing people quality healthcare. What happens? In the U.S., we have a somewhat regulated market, and we still have 30 to 45,000 people die every single year because they don't have access to basic health coverage. Is that okay? There are other countries where this number does not exist. It's zero. So, no, not necessarily. The free market does not always create perfect living conditions. There are some things that the free market simply fails at providing. That's well documented at this point, and that's something that I want to have Brian on the show because he disagrees with me on this. He says, and I quote, "Everything the government does turns to shit," and I can't disagree more on that statement. There are some things that the government just does better than the free market. So strongly disagree with that. Let's go to the next page. Okay, now I got to speed this up, dude, because I feel like I'm taking a long time to answer these. Abortion, when the woman's life is not threatened, should always be illegal. Strongly disagree. No. I am pro-choice. I'm very pro-choice. In fact, I would say the current standard in the U.S., which is that states can regulate it past, I believe, 26 weeks. You know, I think that's somewhat fair. I might go further than that, but I think that's around when the nervous system develops. So then they make the argument, well, they're in pain at that point, so we can't abort them after that. And then after that, some states allow it if it's a rape, if it's a this, if it's a that. So that's a reasonable standard. That's a reasonable compromise that I'm fine with as is. But ultimately, I err very strongly on the side of pro-choice. I think the world is overpopulated, guys, and I know a lot of people say that this problem is virtually fixed because we're not replacing the people that are dying at this point. I haven't looked deeply into the statistics of that, so I can't say either or. But I just know that if that is the case, it's largely because we've introduced a lot of contraceptives into the world. So contraceptive is a very good thing. Abortion is a very good thing, and I will defend that to the death. Let me make sure I'm answering this right. Should always be illegal. Yeah, disagree with that. Okay. All authority should be questioned. Strongly agree. I'm not saying all authority is bad. I'm just saying all authority should be subject to questioning. You know, an authority needs to define the necessity of its existence to exist. We all accept authority because it is necessary. That's kind of implicit in the social contract. So yeah, all authority should be questioned. I'm 100% behind that. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Strongly disagree with this. I think sometimes, not sometimes, I mean a lot of the time, punishing someone egregiously for something they've done. I mean, there are cases where A, it's an accident. B, in terms of our criminal justice system, they are wrongfully convicted. So, for instance, I'm against the death penalty. I'm against it simply because we get the wrong person sometimes, and I'm not okay with the government killing people when they are innocent. And as far as I can tell, life in prison is a lot worse than being killed. I don't know if you've noticed, being in prison fucking sucks. Prisons are shitty. So, I don't know. I've never got that. Why people defend death penalty to the end. I mean, A, they can work in prison, so they can provide something for society. B, living life in prison is shit. Dude, it's a lot worse than dying. It's a lot worse than dying. But anyway, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. I fundamentally disagree with that because I think some punishment is not always the answer. Revenge is not always the answer. Sometimes, yes, it falls under the purview of rehabilitation. I'm just going to address the chat right now. Hey, how's it going, everybody? Bean Cord, what's up? Ryan, what's up? Jiu-Jitsu, also known as Brandon, what's up? Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. I mean, who gives a shit, right? Like, that shit is so cheap. In terms of our, $2.3 trillion budget, shit is, it's a dime in the bucket, dude. Like, I don't really care one way or the other. So I'm gonna disagree with this. I don't really strongly disagree with it because, like, if a community, for instance, if my town votes to stop funding the local community theater, that's democracy. I can't disagree with that. So, if they want to, I don't care. But, like, ultimately, it's a drop in the bucket. It's so little. Why don't you go after the military spending? That's a much bigger aspect of our wasteful government. So I'm gonna disagree with that. Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. I don't know. This is one that I'm kind of split on because on the one hand, I'm very libertarian, and I think if someone doesn't want to go to school, I kind of feel bad forcing them to do anything but on the other hand, public education has made this country smarter, and that's not an opinion, that's a fact. And it's a fact the world over. You see countries that don't invest in public education and their literacy rates are lower. Now, do we really want to feed fire to the already abysmal education in this country? The fact that this country has, keep it real, guys, a stupidity problem. A stupidity problem. We have a lot of kind of dumb people in this country. They're just, and not even necessarily they're low IQ, but like, and not that really matters, but they're not very educated. Our education system already is underfunded. So telling people, don't bother coming, I don't know. I think you could give them the option of doing school at home. We can have online learning, for example. I think that's a great path towards the future, but I think people generally should be educated to an extent. So I don't know, should not make classroom attendance compulsory. I'm going to slightly disagree with that. All people have their rights, but it is better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. Strongly disagree with that. I am a multiculturalist. I think us seeing different people and getting along with different people and, for example, you study desegregation and look at integration in schools, and it's had a largely good effect. And I think people generally are just people, and no matter how you look, no matter what you are, I mean, you're a human being at the end of the day. That's what you are. A lot of people say, let's build the wall. But I mean, what's across that border, right? What are you worried about across that border? Are there Yetis across that border? Are there, is Thanos across that border? Are there fucking not wildlings? Are there White Walkers across that border? I mean, like, be real, guys. They're human beings. And yes, you can regulate the border to an extent, but a wall is not going to really do it if that's what you're looking to do. And it's not like you're keeping out monsters. Like, I don't know. That's just something I've been thinking about recently. But yeah, integration is totally a good thing. Multiculturalism is generally a good thing. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. Strongly disagree with that. It is silly. Any child psychologist will tell you this. This is not controversial, guys. This is not controversial at this point. It's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents. Strongly agree. That's self-explanatory. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. Strongly agree. Yeah, make that all drugs. Put me down for all drugs. All drugs right there, not just marijuana. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs. Strongly disagree with this. I mean, it can be an aspect of it, sure, but the primary function of schooling should be to educate people, to give them information, to teach them how to think for themselves as well. That's another thing that is not taught enough. Standardized tests, for example, really, really fucking bad idea. We need people to actually expound on the answer rather than just picking from a bunch of options, because then you can just, I did a lot of educated guessing, growing up, and that's not a way to necessarily educate people. People with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. You got me there. What is? I mean, that would make me a eugenics supporter, wouldn't it? If I say I agree to that. Yikes. I'm gonna agree with that with some caveats. Like, I know that is scary to some people, regulating birthing, but I don't know. To an extent, I do agree with that, and I think there's definitely a conversation to be had onto like how you regulate that and what goes too far. I totally agree that there's a conversation there, and it's not just cut and dry. But I'm gonna go ahead and agree with that. To an extent, yes. Like, inheritable diseases that you die in like 5 years once you're born, that's like really shitty for someone to have to go through, and we should try as hard as we can to minimize that. And just in general, people are having too many kids, like I said before. I'm in favor of controlling the population growth in this country and world. The most important thing for children is to learn to accept discipline. Strongly disagree with that. Discipline is only part of the picture, and it's not even a particularly good part. There are no savage and civilized people. There are only different cultures. Okay, this is the cultural subjectivism, or cultural subjectivism, you could say moral subjectivism, cultural subjectivism. And generally speaking, yes, there are just different cultures. But if we get into, I'm going to say agree to this, but if we get into the nitty gritty of it, are there some cultures that, yes, you could call them savage? For instance, just as a descriptor, you could call them savage in their methods. For instance, sacrificing people to gods. That's pretty savage. That's pretty barbaric. So yeah, I mean, you could say that some people are savage, but generally speaking, it is a cultural difference that makes them that way. It's not because there's something in their DNA that makes them that way. So I'm going to say I agree, but with many caveats. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. Strongly disagree with that. Like I said before, we're entering an age where many people just don't have to work, universal basic income. Robots are replacing many jobs, so some people are not necessarily going to have to work. That doesn't mean that they are shitty people, that we should look down on them. It doesn't mean that they should live like a rich, like a king, okay? That doesn't mean they should make $100,000 a year, but they should still get to live in our society. They should still get the basics, a roof over their head, water and food. So yeah, I'm going to strongly disagree with that. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. I don't know how this pertains to politics, honestly. I mean, I'm gonna disagree with this, because when you're troubled, sometimes that means, okay, maybe strongly disagree with this, because as the minimalists would say, sometimes the biggest changes in your life, the most important changes in your life, were catalyzed by a really shitty situation. You're in a relationship that you just cannot stand one more second of. It is driving you up the wall. You can't stand each other. You hate each other. It's, why am I continuing to do this? And so you're miserable, and that catalyzes you to finally do something, to get up and leave. So it sometimes you do have to think about it and say, yeah, fuck this. I'm making a change. I'm changing today. So yeah, strongly disagree. First-generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. I will agree that to an extent it can be hard. For example, if you come from a fundamentalist Islamic country, I see the arguments that, yes, putting them directly into a Western European country, it's a bit of a culture clash, right? I get that. But does that mean that we should keep them all out and, fuck people in general? Who cares about them? Let's only care about ourselves. No, I think to an extent we can help alleviate these crises around the world. So I'm I'm going to say never be fully integrated. Hell no. Absolutely. Sometimes they can. Absolutely. So, and I've seen that happen, dude. I've seen that happen. So I'm going to strongly disagree with this because it's totally possible. I mean, are we really going to, can never be fully integrated? Never. That word is a very serious word you do not throw around lightly, okay? What's good for the most successful corporation is always ultimately good for all of us. Ah! Since when? I mean, like, who can champion this? You know, I mean, again, I'll have that discussion, but really, who can champion what's good for the most successful corporation is always ultimately good for all of us. Strongly disagree. Okay, Apple is a very successful corporation, and they paid, it was either last year or the year before, $0 in taxes. So we're going to go ahead and say strongly disagree on that. No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. Strongly disagree with that. Look, I don't even listen to NPR. I'm not like an NPR cheerleader, okay? They run a lot of segments that I effing hate. But are we really going to say they're worse than Fox, CNN, MSNBC? Are we going to say they're worse than them? Nah. NPR has its problems, but a lot of their shit they do is actually comparatively not that bad. So, I mean, I don't have a fundamental disagreement with a broadcasting institution being publicly funded. So, strongly disagree. Next page, and we're blasting through this. I'm going to go real fast on this one because we're taking a lot of fucking time here. Our civil liberties are being Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. Strongly agree with that. Just look at the Patriot Act. Google it. Patriot Act. Good example. NSA, the NSA, good example. A significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. I don't know that that's an advantage because let's say that one-party state is a fascist party and it's like, okay, we're avoiding all of the discussions about gassing the Jews. We're avoiding that discussion. We're just going straight on into it. I mean, like if it's a utopia and they're doing nothing but like really awesome left-wing things that I like, theoretically that'd be nice, but I mean, that's never going to happen is the problem. A, that's never going to happen, and B, I don't know if it's worth it to get all of those awesome things done if it means pissing off half the country for generations where they're going to be militant and against us. So we need to win people over in the battle of ideas to an extent. You know, if this country gets really, really bad over the next few years and the progressive revolution doesn't happen and this country, you know, it just seems doomed in terms of climate change. Like I could see a focused violent revolution if like it really comes to that. You know, I mean, I'm not daft. I'm not saying like that could never happen, but our first priority should be to just change people's minds and try to do it the right way. You know what I mean? So I'm going to strongly disagree with that. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. Strongly disagree with that. We need to dismantle the NSA. Surveillance state is really bad. It is really bad. I was actually spied on by Homeland Security fairly recently, as were 1 million Americans spied on by Homeland Security. And it's getting bad, guys. We got to stop this shit. We seriously have to stop this shit. It's detrimental to democracy as a whole. I'm sorry. It just is. The death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes. Strongly disagree. Just because, again, like I said earlier, sometimes the government gets the wrong person. And I believe it's the figure I have is 4% of the time they convict the wrong person in terms of the death penalty. And we've killed innocent people. And I'm not okay with killing innocent people just to make sure that those really shitty ones are dead. And honestly, life in prison is pretty bad. It sucks, dude. A lot of people don't get this, but life in prison is a lot worse than being killed. It is hell on earth in American prisons. I would reform the prison system to an extent, but it is hell on earth in prison. So it's actually worse to keep them alive in there working for us. A lot of them do work for the rest of the country. And there's some fucked up shit going on with that too. I'm not gonna sign on to that. I'm not signing on to prisoners working necessarily across the board. I think they should do some things, but other things are kind of fucked up. Anyways, In civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded. I strongly disagree. Not necessarily. It depends. If someone gives me a convincing reason why someone deserves an authority over something, like for instance the police, then I can be persuaded, sure, that sometimes authority is necessary, but not always. Not always. It has to justify itself. So one must always have people above. Always. That's the key word. I strongly disagree with that. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. Strongly disagree. It's not political. Like who fucking cares? Like that's not a big political issue. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. Strongly disagree. I think the facts and figures pretty much indicate that the vast majority of crime has to do with material disadvantage. People lacking material scarcity, or they have material scarcity, so they go out and rob in order to, pay the bills. So in many cases, these type of crimes are definitely something that you can rehabilitate someone. Many, many, many people locked up are not too far gone. The people in there for drug crimes, they ought to just be let go today. So that's a good example. But, the entire sphere of drug use and abuse, that should be medical. It should not be punishment. Okay. Take a peek when you're done. I definitely will, Duder. Absolutely. So strongly disagree with that. In criminal justice, rehabilitation should be first and foremost. And then there are some people who, yes, are really dangerous and maybe they should be removed from the general society permanently. And that could be seen as a punishment or just a protection for the rest of us. So that's a secondary thing, but rehabilitation should be the first and foremost goal. It is a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some criminals. Strongly disagree. The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. Not necessarily. I mean, manufacturer, I would somewhat agree with that, but business person, not really. Manufacturing is very important. We need goods, obviously, but the writer and the artist is good too because it moves the conversation forward, and it's hugely beneficial to society in terms of changing minds. So, I'm going to disagree with this, but only because it's just not necessarily true. It could sometimes be true, but it's not necessarily true. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. Strongly disagree with this. It could be the case that the man wants to be a homemaker, and that's not a problem. I'm not a naturalist. I don't say, well, it was like this in nature, so that's the way it's got to be forever. No, in my view, that's a very silly argument to make, and I can show you ample examples of why that falls apart under the tiniest bit of scrutiny. Multinational corporations are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing countries. Probably. Yeah, I've seen examples of that, so I'm going to strongly agree with that. For example, Bolsonaro in... I guess you could consider trees plants, right? Bolsonaro in Brazil is threatening to sell off, or I think he's putting this in motion, to sell off the Amazon rainforest, right? And this is a very important ecosystem for the rest of the planet. It is highly detrimental if we lose that. So, yeah. And I'm sure these are multinational corporations that he would, in theory, be selling them to. So, making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. Strongly disagree. The establishment in this country is fucked beyond belief. And I think just about all of you will agree with that. I think right, left doesn't matter. You will generally all agree with that. So the establishment, totally effed. Next page. All right, finally getting through with this thing. Astrology accurately explains many things. That's the one with star signs, right? Yeah, astronomy is the one that is real. Strongly disagree with that. That is really hocus pocus. You cannot be moral without being religious. Strongly disagree, and I'll go ahead and say it. I am an atheist. I am... You could say that I'm a pantheist to an extent. I'm willing to... I have friends that are pantheists, and they've said things about it that make me cock my head and go, oh, okay, that's reasonable. But in terms of everyday belief in a God, I just don't. I lack a belief. I'll put it that way. I'm not sitting here saying there is no God, and I'm absolutely sure of that. I'm just saying I lack a belief in God, and I do believe that makes me an agnostic atheist. So I'm an atheist. Charity is better than Social Security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. Absolutely disagree with that. I think The evidence is borne out in the history. Social Security raised an incredible amount of people out of poverty, as does food stamps and many other things. So, yeah. Let's see here. Some people are naturally unlucky. I mean, okay, what does this really mean? Because, I mean, naturally unlucky? Like, that's the word that makes me say no. I mean, and I don't believe in luck. So, I don't know. Is this a left wing or a right wing position? I don't get it. Like, I don't know how that is relevant. If someone in the chat wants to chime in on this one, I'm genuinely clueless. Some people are naturally unlucky. I would say some people are unlucky if you want to just look at the outcome of their life. I don't know. Maybe agree with that, I guess. A little bit agree with that. I don't believe in luck, and I don't believe it naturally occurs that someone is unlucky. I think people, in terms of their outcomes, in terms of being born into a particular status, yeah, totally can be born unlucky. But yeah, exactly. I think that is what it means. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it means. So I'm gonna agree with that. If that's really what it means, I want to strongly agree with that. But fuck it, I'll strongly agree with it. It is important that my child's school instills religious values. Strongly disagree with that. I am an atheist. And going back to this question before, I really don't, or not this one. Going back to this one, I really don't think that you need religion to have morals. I believe I have a very strong moral compass that guides me in what I do and how I behave in society. And it's more informed by empathy, compassion for other beings, human or otherwise. So let's go to the next page. We're almost done with this thing. Well, let's look at sex. Hell yeah. Okay. Sex outside marriage is usually immoral. Strongly disagree with that. Marriage and sex have nothing to do with one another. Absolutely nothing to do with one another. A same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. Absolutely agree with that. Because it doesn't matter. If you have two parents that care about you and are trying to see to it that you have a good life, who cares if they're male, female, purple, red? Who gives a shit, honestly? I have never seen any data that implies that makes one bit of difference. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population. Yeah. Duh. And I know the UK is apparently cracking down on this. Shame on y'all. What the fuck are y'all doing, dude? That's really at the top of your list? That's at the top of your priorities? Porn? Who cares? Who cares? What goes on in the private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. Strongly agree with that. This is sex we're talking about, not economics. No one can feel naturally homosexual. Strongly disagree with that. I know many people who do. I've seen it firsthand, so what the fuck is this? These days, openness about sex has gone too far. In my opinion, it has not gone far enough. Do you remember The Amazing Atheist and the whole banana thing? How long has he taken flack for that? Like, I know a lot of times people are just trolling and joking and they don't really think it's like a bad thing. But I mean, dude, he will never live that down. I don't think he cares, honestly. But I mean, that just shows you how much of a complex people have about sex, where they're just like obsessed with it and obsessed with other people not showing their sexuality, or in some cases, maybe people are very hypersexual. But I think generally as a society, we are very sexually repressed, just as a rule. I just think that's the case personally. So these days, openness about sex has gone too far. Strongly disagree with that. So let's go ahead and see what I got. Now let's see where you stand. Show me what you got. About the political compass. Okay, so we got Stalin here, we got Hitler here, we got Thatcher, Friedman, Gandhi. Let's see where I am. Uh-oh. We are way down here. Actually, the last time I moved up a little bit, I think only because I probably answered the one about regulating birth defects, like things like that. I probably answered that with like, no, the state shouldn't fuck with it. And that originally I was down here. I was like right at this near like the second point from the very bottom of left libertarian, but I've moved a little bit up on here. But yeah, I'm very left-wing libertarian. I told you guys that's generally where I fall. I'm I'm very anarchist friendly in terms of the philosophy of anarchism. I sometimes disagree with anarchists on the implementation. Anarcho capitalists, for instance, I highly disagree with them. I highly disagree with right-wing forms of anarchism, and even, some left-wing anarchists where how they talk about their implementations, I'm sometimes lost, and I'm like, what? I don't get it. I don't get it. So, I mean, generally speaking, I support the pragmatic approaches to fixing the government we already have. Medicare for all, ending the drug war, ending the real wars, things like that. I generally fall in agreement with many progressives on those base issues. But ultimately, long term, the type of society I'd like to see unfold is one where hierarchies that are totally unnecessary are disbanded largely. They're broken down into only the ones we absolutely need. The government is minimized down to simply a welfare state. It only protects people. It protects, you could have a military, of course, that protects us from outward invasions. But generally speaking, I support a minimal government that is very left-wing in its economic interpretations and very pro-worker, pro-people on the bottom. And I want to democratize the workplace as much as possible, as much as humanly possible. Now, I admit that there are things about human nature we don't totally understand yet, and it could be possible that many of the ideas I want just aren't feasible. That's possible. I'm willing to hear those arguments, but generally speaking, this is where I fall, and these are the arguments you're going to be seeing from me, generally speaking. Now, I do buck this trend on some issues, and I'm probably not going to be able to think of any off the top of my head right now. But yeah, it's not necessarily this simple. Like I said, this test is not 100%. It is not totally accurate. So it may not even fully encapsulate my views, or it almost assuredly does not fully encapsulate my views, but it's a general idea, you know what I'm saying? So that's that. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it wasn't too long and rambly. I tried to be as concise and to the point as I possibly could while still expounding on why I'm choosing these options, but that's where I lie, guys. So thanks for watching this segment. I'll see you next time.